Midnight convoy to Angola, Louisiana's farm prison under the spotlight. The road to Angola. Hit subscribe, tap the bell, and comment if you've ever wondered what happens to the most dangerous inmates when the lights go out. The first thing you notice is the sound. Not the roar of sirens or the screech of tires, but the low diesel growl of engines idling in a state parking lot in the dead of night. Headlights are doused, radios turned down to a murmur. Prison transport buses painted dull white with thin blue stripes wait under a cloudless Louisiana sky. Each window is covered with steel mesh, each door reinforced. Around them, state troopers stand with arms crossed, scanning the empty access road. This is not an ordinary transfer. This is a midnight run. By the late 1990s, the Louisiana Department of Public Safety and Corrections had perfected the choreography of these secretive convoys. Officially, they were routine transfers of high-risk inmates. Unofficially, critics called it diesel therapy, a tactic meant to disorient and punish prisoners by moving them long distances in shackles for hours at a time, term documented by the ACLU and several investigative journalists. Prisoners accused of killing guards, leading riots, or plotting escapes were often woken without warning, strip-searched, and hustled into waiting vans under heavy guard. Sometimes the rides lasted 12 to 15 hours across multiple states, a trip so long that ankles swelled under shackles. Among the men loaded on buses on one humid July night in 2003 was Marcus Red Halley, name changed, case composite based on several documented Angola transfers. According to court affidavits filed that year, Halley had been serving a life sentence at a medium security facility after a botched armed robbery left a store clerk dead. He had a reputation for violence behind bars and had been implicated, but never convicted, in a stabbing of a correctional officer. 2 weeks earlier, a homemade shank had been found under his mattress. Prison officials decided he was too great a risk to remain. What Halley did not know as shackles clicked around his wrists was where he was going. Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola had a fearsome reputation. The largest maximum security prison in the United States, built on 18,000 acres of a former slave plantation along a bend in the Mississippi River. It was nicknamed the Farm for a reason. Even in the 21st century, men in striped uniforms still bent over rows of soybeans, corn, and cotton under armed horseback guards. According to Human Rights Watch and multiple lawsuits, most of Angola's 6,000-plus prisoners were serving life sentences with no parole. Over three-quarters were black men. The prison operated its own internal high-security unit known as CampJ, a prison within a prison for those considered most dangerous. By 1:15 a.m., the convoy rolled out, 2 buses flanked by state police cruisers front and rear. The route was deliberately indirect. Drivers took back roads, changing highways to avoid any hint of a protest or media stakeout. Inside, the air conditioning barely worked. Prisoners sat 3 to a bench, belly chains connecting them in a single line. One man whispered, "They're taking us to Angola," but guards ordered silence. As the miles slid by, exhaustion mixed with dread. Lawsuits later claimed some men were denied bathroom breaks, forced to urinate in bottles. Those allegations remain unconfirmed but were cited in 2006 federal filings. At a gas station off U.S. Highway 61, a lone investigative reporter, tipped off about a possible transfer, watched a blur of white buses pass under the glow of sodium lights. She snapped a grainy photo for the morning edition of the Baton Rouge Advocate. The headline would read, "Night Moves. High-risk inmates secretly moved to Angola." It would be one of the first public glimpses of the state's midnight convoys. By dawn, the Mississippi River was a sheet of bronze under rising sun. The convoy crested a levee road, the prison coming into view, miles of razor wire, watchtowers, and fields stretching beyond sight. For the men inside, this was the end of the line. For Halley, it marked the beginning of a new and more brutal chapter, one that would later form the heart of an ACLU lawsuit alleging cruel conditions and retaliatory transfers. For Louisiana, it was business as usual. But before sunrise that morning, something happened at the Sally port of Angola, something not in any official report. As guards prepared to unload the new arrivals, a package changed hands between two officers, a moment caught only by a flicker of a security camera. What was in it remains a mystery. Weeks later, a whistleblower inside the Department of Corrections would risk his job to contact that same reporter with explosive allegations about the transfer's true purpose. That revelation, still hidden from public view at this point in our story, would blow open a controversy about Angola's midnight convoys and expose a network of back-channel deals between prison officials, state politics, and private contractors. And it would all begin with a single photograph in a small-town newspaper. The whistleblower's file. When the Baton Rouge Advocate ran the grainy photograph of the white buses, it should have been a small story buried below the fold. Instead, it began to circulate among prisoner rights groups and legal advocates. By Monday afternoon, the newsroom phones were ringing with anonymous tips. One caller, voice distorted by a cheap burner phone, left only a sentence. "Look at the Sally Port cameras, 3:17 a.m., package exchange." The reporter, Sarah Denham, a composite of several real Louisiana journalists who investigated Angola, knew enough about the penitentiary system to be skeptical. She had covered small-town council meetings, rural corruption, and a few grim murder trials. But this was something else, an institution with its own laws, its own weather, and its own hidden economy. She began with public records requests, transfer logs, incident reports, use of force reviews. Most came back with heavy redactions. Then came a second call. This time the man identified himself only as Joseph. He claimed to be a corrections officer at Angola, stationed in the intake unit. He said he had information on the July transfer and on diesel therapy rides so long and punishing that some inmates arrived dehydrated, their wrists raw from shackles. He spoke of men sent to CampJ without hearings, stripped of belongings, thrown into windowless cells for months. Some details matched allegations in pending lawsuits filed by the ACLU of Louisiana. Others were unconfirmed. But Joseph went further. He said the package passed between two officers that night contained cash, a payoff tied to a private transportation contractor. Sarah pressed him for proof. Joseph promised documents, but only in person. They met 2 nights later in the dim corner of a truck stop diner off Highway 190, far from the capital. He slid a manila envelope across the table, printouts of internal emails, time-stamped photographs, handwritten notes. If genuine, they showed a pattern of off-books payments for special handling of certain inmates, including Marcus Red Halley. One memo referred to high-value transfers who must be kept off the grid for at least 48 hours. As Sarah read, a trucker's CB radio hissed in the background. Joseph sat with his back to the wall, eyes flicking toward the door. He said others in the department were uneasy but afraid. One officer had been reassigned after questioning overtime discrepancies. "They bury things up there," he muttered. "Not just inmates." The deeper Sarah dug, the stranger it became. A retired Angola warden told her, on the record, that midnight transfers were standard procedure to reduce security risks, nothing more. But a former inmate now living in New Orleans sent her a sworn affidavit describing a 14-hour shackled ride from a Florida prison to Angola in 2002. He called it a moving coffin. Another document from Joseph hinted at a second whistleblower inside the state police escort team. Sarah tried to verify the package story. Through a source in the Attorney General's office, she obtained a partial security log from the night in question. The 3:17 a.m. entry, the moment of the alleged handoff, was missing. Entire blocks of data were blank. When she asked the Department of Corrections press office about it, she received a one-line reply. No irregularities noted. But her persistence triggered pushback. An unmarked sedan began parking across from her apartment at night. Her email was hacked. A draft of her article disappeared from her laptop, though she'd saved it offline. She started carrying a paper notebook instead. Joseph warned her in a late-night call, "They know you're looking." Meanwhile, inside Angola, Marcus Halley learned what the farm really meant. At dawn, he was marched with dozens of other new arrivals to the fields. Armed guards on horseback patrolled the rows, their rifles glinting. The sun beat down. The soil was red and hard. By noon, his shirt clung to his back. The whispered rumor among the line workers was that some transfers weren't just for security. They were for labor. A lifer named Darnell, skin leathered by decades under the sun, said he'd seen men brought in 1 week and vanish the next into CampJ, never to return. Sarah's article, if published, could connect these whispers to paper evidence. But with documents disappearing and sources growing skittish, the window to expose the truth was closing. Joseph hinted he had one last file, the one that would burn the whole thing down. When he finally called to arrange the handoff, his voice shook. "Meet me at the levee road by the old sugar mill," he said. "Midnight. Bring no one." Sarah hesitated. It felt like a setup. But without that file, she had nothing that would stand up in court. She agreed. As midnight approached, the Mississippi shimmered under a thin moon. The sugar mill loomed like a ruin, its windows black holes. Sarah parked 100 yards away, heart hammering, a small recorder hidden in her jacket. She could see a figure by the waterline, hands in pockets, head bowed. "Joseph." She stepped out, the crunch of gravel loud in the humid stillness. Then from the shadows near the mill, another sound, the distinct click of a camera shutter or a rifle bolt. Shadows on the levee. The humidity at the Mississippi River bends time. It makes the night feel like a living thing, thick, sticky, muffling sound until only your heartbeat is left. Sarah Denham stood on the gravel shoulder, her car idling behind her, headlights off. The ruined sugar mill ahead of her looked like a black-toothed grin against the pale sky. Joseph was a silhouette by the waterline, hands in pockets, the faint glow of a cigarette ember near his face. Then came a click again. Not a rifle bolt, she realized, but a camera shutter, fast, mechanical, 3 in a row. Someone was photographing the meeting. "Joseph," she whispered. "Don't turn around," he muttered. "They're here." Sarah's instincts screamed to leave, but she forced herself to walk forward. Joseph stepped toward her, pressing a flash drive into her palm. "Everything's on here," he said. "Emails, routing orders, contracts. It's what they don't want you to see." A car door slammed in the darkness. Footsteps. 2 men emerged from the shadows of the mill, their badges catching a stray beam of moonlight. Internal Affairs from the Department of Corrections. "Ms. Denham," one called. "We need to ask you a few questions." Joseph backed away. "They'll bury me," he said under his breath. Then, louder, "I'm not going with you." The agents closed in. Sarah slipped the drive into the lining of her jacket. "We're just talking," she said, voice steady, but her pulse was hammering. She knew if they found the drive, the story was over. Joseph bolted. For a moment, he was a dark blur across the levee, running for the cane fields beyond. One agent lunged. The other shouted, "Stop!" Their flashlights cut across his back. A shot cracked, not at him, but into the air, a warning. Joseph stumbled, but kept running, disappearing into the tall grass. The agents cursed and took off after him. Sarah stayed frozen. When she finally looked down, her hands were shaking. On the ground by her feet lay a folded sheet of paper Joseph had dropped. It bore a single line scrawled in pencil. "CampJ roster, see page 4. No signature." She made it back to her car and drove away before the agents returned. In the rearview mirror, the sugar mill shrank to a black blot. Her phone buzzed. A new email from an anonymous account. Subject line, "You're next." Inside Angola. Meanwhile, Marcus read, Halley was learning how easily men vanished. Darnell, the old lifer who'd whispered warnings, didn't show up for roll call the next morning. The guard said he'd been moved to administrative segregation. Other inmates whispered he was gone to CampJ for talking too much. Red was assigned to hoe rows in a part of the field nicknamed the Hills for its sun-baked mounds of dirt. Armed guards on horseback watched from the levee. Inmates called the place the farm within the farm. Word of Joseph's flight reached the prison grapevine. Inmates said a guard had gone rogue and might be leaking documents to the press. Red began to realize his own transfer wasn't just punishment for a shank under the mattress. It was part of something larger. He noticed a different color stamp on his work pass, the same one Darnell had before he disappeared. Back in Baton Rouge, Sarah stayed up all night, downloading the flash drive onto a clean laptop. Inside were scanned invoices, private contractor agreements, and a spreadsheet marked special movement. It listed dozens of names, dates, and destinations. Page 4, the one Joseph had scribbled, showed a CampJ roster with a separate column labeled Labor Priority. Red's name was there. But the most explosive item was a series of emails between a senior Department of Corrections official and a transportation contractor. In one, the official wrote, "All high-value transfers must remain off media radar. Incentive as agreed." The incentive matched the cash Joseph had described. Sarah felt a surge of vindication and fear. This was enough to trigger subpoenas if she could get it published. But at 3 a.m., her apartment's power flickered, then died. Outside, a car engine revved and then drove off. Someone was letting her know she was being watched. The next morning, the Advocate's editor called her into his office. "We've had a visit," he said grimly. "State police want your notes. They say your source is under investigation." He advised her to back off, at least for now. But Sarah knew time was running out for Joseph, for Red, for everyone on that roster. She decided to go public anyway. She began drafting a story that would lay out the convoys, the secret payments, and the hidden labor system at Angola. She reached out to the ACLU's lead attorney for comment. He agreed to meet but warned her they've been trying to kill this case for years. Be careful. That night, a new email arrived in her encrypted inbox. It contained a single photo, Joseph crouched and handcuffed on a gravel road at dawn, 2 armed men standing over him. No location, no date, just the caption, "This is what happens." Sarah stared at the screen, heart pounding. The stakes had shifted. Her source was in custody, or worse. The only proof of his claims now sat in her hands. Somewhere inside Angola's labyrinth of fields and cell blocks, Marcus Halley was being led away from the work crew by 2 guards. They told him he was going to orientation. Inmates watching from the row whispered that no one comes back from orientation. The convoy breaks cover. Dawn in Baton Rouge broke pale and silent. Sarah Denham sat at her kitchen table, the flash drive plugged into a borrowed laptop, her draft story open on the screen. She'd spent the night on the phone with the ACLU attorney, lining up affidavits and cross-checking the documents against public records. The flash drive had turned out to be a Rosetta Stone. Transfer logs, contractor invoices, hidden payment memos, all cross-referenced to the July convoy and to a cluster of inmates, including Marcus "Red" Halley. At 6:15 a.m., she hit send, transmitting the story to her editor and to a national wire service simultaneously. If one outlet tried to suppress it, another would already have it. The headline she wrote herself: "Secret Midnight Transfers, Cash Payments, and Hidden Labor at Angola Prison." She knew it would burn bridges. But the story had teeth, a paper trail, a named source, Joseph, and a roster showing high-risk prisoners funneled into Angola's fields and CampJ without due process. The article went live at 7:02 a.m. Within minutes, it was picked up by morning radio in New Orleans and by a criminal justice blog in Washington, D.C. By noon, the Baton Rouge courthouse steps were crowded with TV trucks. Civil rights attorneys held up the printed spreadsheet from the flash drive. The state's Department of Corrections issued a 1-paragraph denial, calling the allegations inaccurate and defamatory. But the governor ordered an internal review the same afternoon. Inside Angola, the effect was immediate. Guards on horseback kept the work lines tighter, but whispers spread like fire. "They know about the transfers," one inmate murmured. "They got the list." That night, a small protest erupted in a dormitory when a group of lifers refused to return to their bunks, chanting CampJ roster, until tear gas canisters rolled across the floor. Marcus Halley, still marked with the stamp on his pass, was led not to Camp J, but back to general population. No explanation. He caught sight of a guard reading a printout of the article, his lips pressed tight. Later, a younger officer whispered to him through the food slot, "Your name's in the paper. Somebody's looking out for you." Sarah, meanwhile, was preparing for the backlash. The photo of Joseph handcuffed had haunted her all night. After the story went live, she received a call from a blocked number. A thin, strained voice said, "Tell them I'm alive." Then the line went dead. The voice sounded like Joseph's, but she couldn't be sure. The Attorney General's office announced he was cooperating with investigators, but refused to confirm his whereabouts. The twist came 2 days later. A veteran state police sergeant contacted Sarah through her encrypted email. He sent a scanned memo stamped confidential. The package passed to the Sally port hadn't been cash at all. It had been a jump drive containing internal surveillance clips. According to the memo, Joseph had been collecting evidence for months. He'd arranged for the handoff to smuggle out proof of the convoy system, but panicked at the last moment and tipped off Sarah instead. That revelation changed the narrative. Joseph wasn't just a whistleblower. He'd been the system's archivist, building a secret record of what he'd seen. His arrest, or protective custody, as officials later called it, came hours before he planned to hand over the complete cash to a federal prosecutor. The memo suggested someone inside the department had warned the contractors, sparking the late-night interception at the sugar mill. Sarah published a follow-up piece with a new memo and screenshots of the surveillance clips Joseph had managed to get to her before disappearing. They showed shackled prisoners boarding buses in the dead of night, time-stamped logs matching the flash drive. The images went viral. Civil rights groups called for a federal investigation into Angola's transfer practices. Members of Congress tweeted the story. Within weeks, the Department of Corrections suspended its contract with the private transportation company named in the documents. CampJ was formally closed in 2015 under public pressure, an actual historical event. Louisiana DOC press release, 2015, but Sarah's story reignited debate about whether its practices had simply been moved elsewhere under new names. And Marcus read Halley? Court records show that within a year of the article's publication, he was transferred out of Angola to a medium-security facility. In a rare letter to the advocate, he wrote, "For the first time in 15 years, I feel like somebody sees us." His case remains ongoing. Sarah never saw Joseph again. Rumors swirled that he'd entered witness protection, that he'd been rehired under a false name, that he'd fled the state. None confirmed. But in an unmarked envelope at her newsroom one morning, she received a single photograph, the Mississippi River at dawn, taken from the levee near the sugar mill. No note. The story of Angola's midnight convoys faded from the headlines, but remained in court filings and legislative hearings. Sarah kept reporting, but she'd learned something enduring. In Louisiana, as in much of the carceral South, the past isn't past. Plantations become prisons. Labor becomes punishment. And secrecy travels best at night, on buses with the lights off. Her final paragraph read, "If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one. Subscribe so you don't miss it." Thanks for watching.